Good afternoon. Today I will be talking about causes and effects of the American Revolutionary War. Of course, the American Revolutionary War can be traced back to the French and Indian War, also known as the 7 Years' War, which was fought over conflicting territorial claims between the French and British in the Ohio River Valley. This took place from 1754 to 1763, and the British victory resulted in basically an expulsion of the French in North America and the rationalization of taxing the Americans to recoup monetary losses. Of course, after the French and Indian War, there was the Proclamation Act of 1763, which prohibited the colonists from moving west of the Appalachian Mountains. Of course, this created a bit of resentment between the British and the colonists, but nothing too serious yet. Now, of course, as the French and Indian War had put Great Britain in a large amount of debt, King George decided that he would begin to enact certain taxes, basically. First, the Stamp Act, which was placed in 1765 and required the colonists to pay a tax on printed documents, various licenses, and other goods. The colonists rebelled and terrorized the British tax collectors. Next would come the Townshend Acts of 1767, which authorized Parliament to issue taxes on in-demand imports such as glass, lead, paint, paper, tea, and British soldiers, as a result of the Townshend Acts, had to be brought into Boston to prevent an uprising. Later on, this would lead to the Boston Massacre, which took place in 1770, and resulted over tension over the presence of British troops in Boston. And this was the first episode between the colonies and the British that resulted in a loss of life. 4 Bostonians were killed when the Redcoats decided to fire into an angry mob. After that, several years later, would come the Boston Tea Party, in which, as many people know, angry colonists would board British ships and toss large amounts of British tea into the ocean. Now, this resulted in the Intolerable Acts, which can be seen as a major cause of the American Revolutionary War. The Intolerable Acts include several acts, including the Boston Port Act, which closed the port of Boston until the Dutch East India Company had been repaid for all the tea that the colonists had destroyed. Then there was the Massachusetts Government Act, which basically put the government of Massachusetts almost entirely under direct British control. The Administration of Justice Act, which allowed royal officials to be tried in Britain if the king felt it necessary for fair justice. The Quartering Act, which the colonists did not like, ordered the colonies to provide lodging for British soldiers. And finally, the Quebec Act, which expanded British territory in Canada and guaranteed the free practice of Roman Catholicism. Now, of course, the colonies decided something had to be done after the Intolerable Acts were put in place, so they held the First Continental Congress, in which 55 delegates representing 12 of the 13 colonies, Georgia was not present, argued over whether or not they should separate from Britain for killing their people and placing unfair taxes and laws on them. They ultimately decided that they would have to do something about Great Britain, and this would transition into the battles of Lexington and Concord, in which the first shots of the American Revolution would be fired. And as a result of the American Revolution, America would go on to become a free nation. Now, in conclusion, you can see that it was the British and their strive for control over the colonists that brought about the downfall of the British in the American colonies. Thank you.